Good evening. Can you all hear me? That's good. I'd like to invite everyone to come take a seat. I know it's hard to leave the bar, but my name's Alan Katz, and I'm the founder of American Public Square. We have seats here in the very front row, which means that you can really sort of eyeball and look, deeply into the eyes of our panelists, so we would hope that someone would come and do that. Tonight's program, Marriage and Millennials, is the third program that's been sponsored by the Martha Jane Phillips Starr Field of Interest Fund at the Greater Kansas City Community Foundation, and we want to thank the Starr family for their support for these programs and for American Public Square. So please join me. We have two of us tonight. We have Jim and Alicia Starr. Please join me in thanking them. Over the course of 3 years with the Starr Foundation, we have had, we looked at the changing makeup of families, aging in place last year, so this year we moved to the others. The aging in place I could identify with. Marriage and Millennials, obviously I can't. But I want to thank tonight, our partner tonight, Seize Multimedia. The American Public Square's 2017-18 season is winding down. We hope you're going to join us at the final events of the season. We have one on the 19th of April at the Johnson County Central Resource Library. The title is East is East and West is West, Segregation in Kansas City. Mayor James will be one of the 4 panelists that evening. Also on the 2nd of May, we have our annual fundraising event where we have, our guest is David Frum, who is the author of Trumpocracy. And we think it will be a very interesting evening. The final program on May the 8th will examine school-based mental health services. More information and registration for all these events is available at americanpublicsquare.org. If you're not an American Public Square member and you did purchase a ticket for tonight, we're going to credit your ticket price towards a membership. So those of you who are not members have a chance to get a discounted membership tonight if you want to take advantage of this special offer. If you're a student, we have a special grant which can serve as a match for your membership cost. Now inside your playbill tonight, you're going to find a question and a fact check sheet. If someone will give me theirs, I'll hold it up. That's what this is, okay? Now if you've got a question, or if you believe that something you've heard up here is factually incorrect, you're going to write it down. You're going to hold your hand up in the air with the sheet, and a volunteer is going to pick it up. And if it's a question, they're going to take it to our roving reporters tonight, Adam Erickson and Elizabeth Hartzler. Where are you guys? Raise your hands. Okay, over there's Elizabeth, and where's Adam? Adam, you're so tall. How can I miss you? Ah, there he is. Okay, sorry. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Okay, and Chris LeBeau, you want to raise your hand, Chris? He's been our fact checker since almost the beginning of time, it seems like, and fortunately we have her with us again tonight. Several members of the audience have civility bells. You know what a civility bell is? That bell right there on that front seat. Did you ring that bell? Go ahead. Okay, that's going to get rung if someone gets uncivil. So that means that basically we are an organization that believes in civil discourse, even when we disagree. We're also asking you not to clap if you agree with a particular point of view. If you agree with it, what we suggest that you all do is you do this. And if you disagree, you just do that. And that way the conversation can continue to flow. It's now my pleasure to introduce tonight's moderator, Ashley Beard-Fosnow. Ashley is Assistant Director of Development for the UMKC Foundation, a great supporter of American Public Square, and a millennial herself, I'm told. A longtime volunteer and a good friend of American Public Square. Please welcome Ashley.
Hi. Thank you so much. I can't even tell you, this is a dream come true. So like Alan said, I'm a supporter of American Public Square. In fact, my favorite use of discretionary time is to sit in that audience. One of those seats and listening to fabulous conversations about political and social issues that matter to this community, and sit next to somebody who has a completely different point of view than me. I think it's truly what the world needs more of, and so I tell people that American Public Square is my guilt-free mom's night out. So I'm glad to keep that going. It is my great pleasure to introduce this amazing panel of experts on the topic of marriage and millennials. Here to my right is Klassie Alcine. Klassie has over 10 years of experience in nonprofit leadership, strategic development, and political campaign management. Currently, she works as the Director of Corporate and Community Partnerships at Central Exchange. Oh yeah, you can clap now. This is the one and the only time that we thank you all profusely for participating. Next to Klassie is Laura Alvarez. Laura helps oversee the Hispanic consumer strategy and marketing and operations at H&R Block. Laura is on the board of Literacy KC and was treasurer of the Young Latino Professionals of Greater Kansas City. Thank you, Laura. Next to Laura is Meredith Davis. Meredith is the head of communications at The League, a social and mobile dating app. As the League's first employee, she played a major role in scaling the company through national and international expansion. Formerly a researcher at the Kinsey Institute, Meredith's mission is to bring a voice to sex, dating, and relationships. Hello, Meredith. And finally, here at the end is Marissa Vidler. Marissa is the founder and research genius at Clearbox Insights. With 18 years in market research, Marissa's curiosity and interest in marketing to the millennial generation led to her first book, Millennials with Kids, marketing to this powerful and surprisingly different generation of parents. Welcome, Marissa. Okay, so thank you all for lending your expertise to this panel tonight. We're gonna start with Marissa, if that's okay. As a marketing expert, you've studied millennials. What exactly is a millennial, and how are they different from other groups?
I'm so glad we're starting here at the beginning, because you would be amazed how often millennials come up to me and insist that they're not a millennial. And that's just not how this works. So there's only one way to define a millennial, and that is the year you were born. It's not something you opt into. It's not something you choose. Guys, you were born this way. So that's how we define millennial. But there are some characteristics and some trends that we see happening among people who were born during those years that we consider millennials. The biggest difference, and I think we'll talk a lot about this tonight, is that they are digital natives. They are the first generation that was born into technology. And these days, technology is really an extension of themselves. It can be world opening to them, but it can also be very overwhelming, and it does affect their relationships and how they look for relationships. There's some other differences from millennials compared to the other generations, including they tend to be more adventurous. They tend to be more socially conscious in terms of the environment. They tend to reject religion at higher rates. And they also tend to be more skeptical of government. And I think all of these are going to come into play as we talk about millennials and marriage this evening.
Oh, that's fascinating. Thank you. Meredith, the millennials are the most connected generation ever. Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. So why dating apps? What is the League, and what is the interest in dating apps?
Yeah, so dating apps, for anyone who may not know what they are, I'm sure many people do, but they are social mobile applications that are on your mobile device on your phone. And there are many different ones out there, right? That there are ones that are pretty niche, farmers only, or like people who are looking for others who are gluten-free. There are apps that are about hooking up. There are apps where women only message first. And so there's a lot of different ones popping up. Just to give you a bit of background, because I know that the League isn't live yet in Kansas City, but actually will be on April 10th, and we can talk about that more later. But the League authenticates with both LinkedIn and Facebook, so we actually block you from your coworkers and your connections on Facebook so that you don't have that awkward swipe dilemma of potentially seeing a coworker on dating apps, which I know can be pretty uncomfortable. But we really did that because of this growing trend that we're seeing in millennials to really want a career partner, someone who is just as ambitious and career focused as one another. I think, again, we'll talk about this more later tonight about what millennials are really looking for, but we believe that that is a major part of it. And why dating apps? You know, like we said, we are digital natives. We are using technology to enhance all aspects of our lives. Why not also impact and affect our dating?
That's really fascinating. Can I ask you, Klassie and Laura, how does what they just spoke about, how have you experienced that or not experienced that personally? So does anything, dating apps or even just what it means to be a millennial? What she was saying about how some millennials don't really classify themselves or think of themselves as millennials. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the public perception. It's like when I hear someone say the word millennial, it's like we're a whole nother segment that is different. In reality is that when folks were our age, our parents gave us a different title. They were like, oh, you young people. And I think that
Kids.
That the whole title, millennial, can sometimes separate us from reality. And at the same sense, when you talk about someone finding a job and someone says, those millennials are so entitled, they feel like they deserve everything. And it's like, well, we were raised by the folks before us. So if that is to happen, then that's a reflection of the folks before us, not a reflection of us. So we are a mirror image of that. And so we have to think more about how we choose to treat people in this world. And we should come from a space of joy and a space of love, because at the end of the day, you live by yourself and you die by yourself. And so you have to think about what experience you're going to have, no matter if you're a millennial or not. And then on the aspect of the apps, I think the apps are great. I have many friends who have been on the apps, and I like to swipe. You know, I think swiping is important. But I think that over time, you know, we have to get back to meeting people face to face. I think some of the apps have lost this essence of connection. And I think that's why we've seen such an increase, and I'm coming from a social work point of view, of this increase of depression and suicide and anxiety that we're seeing. I think that some of the apps may be helping to grow that out. But I can talk more about that later.
No, that's really interesting. What about you, Laura?
I'm a very proud #millennial.
You're here.
I purposely point that out in meetings when people are like, I'm like, millennial, future, let's get us going there. But I will say I've done all the apps, the paid and the non-paid, and I think the one thing that I found was missing in that component was, yes, it helped efficiency in my life, and yes, it helped me pre-screen, and yes, it helped me do all these things that I'm sure people in my past wanted to do, but they didn't have the technology to do that. But I didn't have the ability to pre-screen from like a cultural perspective, and how you view the world, and how you appreciate art, and how do you appreciate music, and how respectful are you to the difference in opinions. And you kind of don't get that until you're face to face and having those conversations. And so I appreciate the apps. I got a lot of fun experiences from them. But I appreciate in person a lot more.
Thank you. Marissa, this one is for you. I started reading your book over the weekend. It's fascinating. In the book, you identify 5 orbits of parents. What are the orbits, and how do they apply to millennials who are not parents?
Well, first, thank you for reading my book.
Just the first part. I'm getting there.
And now I regret not flipping through it tonight before this event, because I don't have those orbits off the top of my head. But I can say that we did some research about millennials with kids, because that was really the focus of the book. And where that came about was we were starting to see some real differences between younger and older millennials. And one of those delineations had to do with when they start to have children. And one of the big differences that we saw happen is that they became a lot more pragmatic. They became a lot more logical and problem solving in how they live, how they consume, and what their priorities are. And I know that didn't specifically answer your question, but I'm afraid I'm not prepared to talk about those 5 orbits right now.
That pragmatism is very interesting. Do millennials change after marriage and having kids in other ways?
Absolutely. And you know, there's some things that we do know about millennials, and there's some things that we can't know about them yet, because many of them are still young. And so to what you were saying before, Klassie, about how millennials are entitled and those darn kids, Every generation, when the older generations look back at you, you seemed entitled when you were kids. When you were listening to that gosh darn rock and roll music, you seemed entitled. So what we don't really know is if some of these labels, if some of these characteristics have to do with the fact that millennials are still young and they are still maturing and growing, or if it has to do with that's just who they are. And I'm afraid that's something we won't really know until we get a little bit further in the future. But what we have seen when millennials do start getting married and having children, they are starting to look more like Gen Xers and boomers and other generations.
Fascinating, thank you. This is for anybody who's interested in answering. How are changing gender roles affecting millennials' attitudes towards marriage?
I'll take this. Politics highly affects our ability to even get married, depending on what state you live in and how normalized or not normalized marrying someone from the same gender is. It's a challenge. It's not a new challenge to this generation. However, politics have allowed for this generation to have less stigma, to have less of a fear of being out there. And I'm saying this as an LGBTQ ally. I'm not speaking as that is my experience, but in having friends that share their open experience of, you know, man, I really freaking love that person and I've loved that person for 10 years and I just wish I could like walk with that person down the aisle, and I know it's, you know, that's not traditional, but that's what matters to some people in marriage, you know, having a life partner. And we as a country don't nationally accept that as the construct of how other people view the institution of marriage. So I think that has to factor into people's decision making. And, you know, do you call it a partnership or do you call it a marriage? Do you actually go forth and go through the process of legally or within your religious factoid of how you believe in, go through that process?
That's really interesting. Do you think that'll change as our generation grows older and holds more leadership roles?
It's hard to say because we as a country have changed from the civil rights movement, yet there's a lot of things that are still happening in today from that era because people's experiences, it didn't just go away. People just experienced a different type of whatever the bad thing was. So I don't have a clear answer there, but it will be interesting to see as a society how we start accepting and how that affects the generations beyond ours.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'd love to add to the gender roles, and I love what you said. And I'm going to oversimplify for just a moment here, but there was a time that men and women played much more traditional gender roles, and the man was expected to be the provider and the woman was expected to be the caretaker. It's not a judgment, it's just what it was. And I think what we're seeing happening now, I mean, you look at this panel and we've got 4 highly educated professional women. What we are bringing to the table is not necessarily just caregiver anymore, and some women are completely opting out of being a caregiver or a parent. And so I think what we're seeing these days in terms of gender roles is these highly educated and professional women coming to the table, knowing what they want, knowing what they're looking for. And I don't think that we've seen the men in this generation quite know what to do with us just yet. And I say us, I'm actually Gen X, but I mean them. But I think we have seen women really progress in terms of career and ambition and all those great things, but it really leaves these gender roles kind of lingering, and it isn't as clear-cut now. And maybe turn it back to the ladies who are out there dating right now. How does that impact when you're out there looking for a potential partner?
I just wanted to point out, I work for Central Exchange, right? It's about shaping women's future. And when you think about a woman, the number one thing that they ask when it comes to trying to balance life is, how do I be a mom? How do I go to work? How do I not feel guilty about not being there at all times? How do I work that all out? And what I've learned from the many speakers that I've seen and heard is that it's not about time, it's about quality and attention. And I think that in the space where you're dealing with women that are more educated, you can't just say a statement to me and expect me not to answer, right? I'm going to answer because I believe that I know the knowledge and that I'm always right, you know? So of course, I'm going to answer. But I think that for millennial women, it is more of a challenge because you still have the men that we date still see this traditional role. And even though sometimes women date to think that, you know, I can help change this man, I can help him grow, and then men may think, oh my God, I cannot wait to marry her and get married and have children, and then she'll be at home and she'll take care of the children, and then I'm not emotionally available. So I think that I agree with the evolution that women are having, but I also think with men it's still such a challenge because of the gender roles and how we are raised. It is still going to be a lot of work. But I think that the men I date range, you know, you could be 23 or you could be 43. So I think that you just have to look at that and see it as an experience just as that. But I will tell you, no matter how big the age range is, the emotional patterns are still the same. I think that men not being able to express their emotions does impact them when they get older. So they're more shut down, they're less likely to want to move towards resolution because of the experiences that they've had.
Gender roles are also a big part of dating apps. We have 88% of our community is millennials, but what we're finding specifically for women, our millennial women message first. About like 50% of our women have at least messaged first to, these are for heterosexual couples, at least once, as opposed to older generations who are messaging first at least one time, less than 40%. So I think like that goes to show that our millennial women, specifically on dating apps, are a lot more progressive in kind of reaching out first, and it's not about these antiquated thoughts of the men being the chaser, or, you know, like chivalry, or men having to, you know, reach out and initiate. So we're really excited that our millennial women are really kind of taking a step back and realizing, or actually taking a step forward and being the ones to initiate the conversations.
I will say I kind of differ on opinions to my counterparts. I'm traditional. I want a partner in life, right? So I want, like, we're gonna share the chores, because, you know, that's boring, and we both agree that's boring, so we're gonna both wash dishes when we don't feel like it. But I have a boyfriend now, and he was like, what does it take to date you? And I was like, ask me on a date. That's what guys are supposed to do. And I was very firm about that. And he was like, you're such a progressive woman. And I was like, I need a date. So if you don't ask me on a date, this is just not gonna happen. And he was like a hard, firm line in the sand that I put down. He never asked me on a date. We went to get pizza and beer, but it was a happy medium.
So we've surveyed over 100 of our League Love success stories, and success meaning couples who have met on the league who have been in relationships for over a year, and 1 out of 3 of them were with the woman messaging first. And so, yes, I agree with you that there are some, you know, people who still believe that you know, that they want the guy to initiate. And again, talking about this is like heterosexual couples, but you know, we're seeing success to be a little bit different than that. You know, we can talk about the dating game and how there's, you know, a lot of fish in the sea right now that you're able to actually see, and it's getting more competitive. And so, you know, if you want to, you know, really talk to that guy or that girl that you're interested in, sometimes it takes messaging first.
Okay, I have one more question, and then we're going to turn to audience questions. So everybody write your question on your little slip of paper and hold them up, and the volunteers will come around and get them. Okay, my question is, along these same lines as gender role, let's switch to money and finances. What role does the job market or student debt play in millennials' decisions about marriage?
Ooh, it's a loaded question.
Money.
I currently pay less on my mortgage than I have to pay on my student loan. And like, I got scholarships. So this isn't like, oh, you know, you just took out way more money. The cost of tuition has risen astronomically without the help of the government, which my former generation kind of had, like, a lot of. And so, you know, that is a, like, because it's not my debt that I'm worried about. I'm going to pay my stuff off and be responsible and woohoo, a good American. But what about the debt that he's bringing in? Like, I don't know how I feel about that too sure. I'm not too sure yet. How does that work out? You know, I got a tax meeting coming up, and that is a question that will be popping up. But that's a big factor. The second is, like, if I want a partner, I want a partner to be my peer. And so what does that mean? What does that partnership mean for us? And there's a lot of negotiation points in there. But how many people have the patience to negotiate and prove their sources if they're asked for that, to move forward with that process, or say, you know what, I got this dating app and like, you're too much, that's too much work, girl, bye. And go on this dating app and get the next person that, oh, very similar to you, but now I don't have to have that conversation, woohoo, I can keep on going. So, I mean, I'm financially very aware of what that impact is, and it does create some anxiety in making a decision to move forward and creating this beautiful partnership that people call marriage. But at the same time, I'm very financially realistic to like what implications those things have.
I think that one trend we're seeing, which really goes in line with what you were saying, Laura, is that it used to be that you got married and became established. And these days, millennials want to be established before they get married for a lot of the reasons that you've shared. It isn't expected that you go down this linear path anymore, that you finish school, get married, have kids, have grandkids. It's just not that linear anymore, and there's this desire to become established, but a lot of challenges for millennials given the time they grew up in, the debt that they're experiencing. So this is one of the reasons I believe that we're seeing the delay in marriage.
And just to piggyback off what you just mentioned, to define adulthood for millennials, they're really defining that by education and profession, and not as much anymore defining it by getting married and having children. And also, what an amazing problem for us to have, that we have to talk about, you know, merging two incomes and salary, because, you know, just a few years ago, it was really one, you know, women weren't really in the workforce. I mean, I believe it's on the fact sheet, so I don't want to get it wrong and have that be an issue, but from 1975 to, I believe, 2016, there was a 43% drop in women who were, you know, in the household. So I think that's a really amazing stat to kind of show our progression.
I just keep thinking about the song, My Love Don't Cost a Thing, because what I think about is that, you know, the average price for marriage has doubled. You know, now folks get married for the wedding, which is really interesting. When you hear about people getting married, like, I'm engaged, you're like, oh my God, this wedding, I'm gonna spend like $50,000. And I think that there's a combination of people want that ring, they want that wedding, but they don't think quite about what happens after that, which I think that's why there's a lot of divorce in that impact, because they're just thinking about how someone else's finances can benefit me in some extent.
Hashtag engaged. We're like the hashtag engaged.
Yeah.
It's social media. It's all about, you know,
yeah. So I think when it comes to finances, I definitely have a lot of friends who are waiting to get engaged or waiting to get married because their student loans are so high. And then on top of that, then they want to buy the house and they want all these things. And I think that people have to really reevaluate their options of choice. And I do know plenty of friends who are engaged, but will be engaged for like 6, 7, 8 years until those student loans are paid off or until they're in a comfortable space. So when you think about the cohabitation that's happening and about having children, finances is huge, and it causes a lot of stress for a lot of people.
And I think you hit on something important. Millennials have that choice. I mean, there's still some societal norms, and their parents are maybe still asking when you're going to get married. But this is probably the first generation where they didn't feel like they have to, or they didn't feel like they have to at a young age. So there's a choice for getting married and for having children now that previous generations didn't feel they had.
Yeah, we are the first generation to come into the dating scene with 10 plus years to really date, and not to date to find someone, but to date and just find yourself and find that compatibility. I think that's where a lot of issues come into play, where people start having, you know, kind of doubting the dating or, you know, the dating scene and dating apps and kind of having a negative output on it, because we are just the first generation to have all this ample time without all the pressure of marriage and children.
The last point, so along with everything they said, totally agree, but we're also more mobile because school put us in debt, so now we're living at our parents' house, and I got this really cool job offer over in San Diego, and so now I'm gonna go there, and I'm gonna do all these cool things, and I don't think my former generation had that flexibility or agility to flex with those experiences of like, I'm really gonna develop as a human being because of all my traveling, I'm gonna be so diverse, I'm gonna be world known, and all these things that hashtag millennials always talk about, like wanderlust, hashtag look at that later. But
no, develop as a human being. That's exactly where we're going to come back to as soon as we take some audience questions.
Ooh. All right, we have a question from the audience. You talked a little bit about cohabitation. So is cohabitation before marriage with millennials affecting marriage or the prospect of marriage? And if so, how?
Yes, it is affecting it because I hate to say why buy the cow, etc. But here's the thing, you know, you can live with your partner before you get married, and there was a time that that was really frowned upon. So if you can live with your partner, a lot of millennials might believe that it doesn't feel that different to be married than to be living together, or they want to give it time. They don't feel like they're in as much of a rush. So I do think it's absolutely impacted how quickly they maybe feel like they need to get married.
For someone who is cohabitating, you know, there is research out there, and there's research for and against showing that cohabitating actually increases your chances of divorce later on if you do get married. But the reason for that is people are cohabitating for the wrong reasons, for finances, right? You know, I live in San Francisco. It was a lot easier to cohabitate and split rent rather than taking on rent alone, or, you know, just the people merging to cities and just the way that people are living these days. But the best way to cohabitate is to go into it knowing and thinking and really believing that this is the person you may spend your life with. And that's the best way to cohabitate, is to, you know, not test it, but to truly believe that this will work.
Do we have another question?
Yeah. Our next question, does having divorced parents impact the want to get married?
yes. I'm a product of a divorced household, and I got the privilege to watch a single mother raise a rock star. Rock star. I tell her that all the time. It's more for her, not for me. But I will say that there are certain, that's why I'm so financially, fiscally, super duper, like, I'm on top of it. You know, 2018 tax reform, I'm like, how is that gonna affect me? Because I saw my mom struggle throughout my childhood, and so I don't want to go through that. And you know, there are things like, that's when you look at marriage as a contract, and you're like, wait, what am I contractually obligated to when I do this thing called marriage? And how do I protect myself? I am like prenup number 1. Let's protect your assets, right? But there are things that, if I was not a product of a divorced household, would I feel that convicted about those things? Probably not. Would I be like, I'm in love and I'm gonna get married now because I'm in love? Probably. But now I'm like, love is cool, but hopefully it'll still be there. Let's figure out this like money situation first.
So were you about to say something? Oh, okay, well, let's go. As someone who has also come from divorced family, the studies do show that you do have an increased likelihood of getting a divorce. But if you kind of look at dating and marriage and relationships from a historical perspective, I think that there are 3 main issues, and 2 we've already solved for, and 1 we're currently trying to solve for. The first is the search dilemma, right? So being able to search for as many people as possible. The second would be a matching dilemma, being able to match. And then the third being compatibility. So our grandparents were kind of stuck in that search dilemma. They were really limited by the neighborhoods that they grew up in or the schools that they went to. And that was solved when our parents' generation came into play, and they were able to not only help with that search dilemma, but also solve for the matching. They were able to match a bit better. But they weren't able to see, you know, all the diversity that's out there and kind of see all their options. So our generation is solving for that search dilemma, that matching, and that compatibility piece. The difference between, you know, the millennials and older is the fact that our, you know, parents and grandparents were really the first generations to marry for love. And that was really kind of a new concept. A lot of people thought that love was enough, and what the millennial generation is realizing is that love is not enough. And so I hope, and of course we don't necessarily know this for sure, but I hope that with this compatibility piece with dating apps and algorithms, we're actually going to be able to, all right, here's someone that I love and is most compatible with me. So I'm hoping that we could actually decrease those divorce rates.
Fascinating. Okay, Klassie, this question is for you. What role does finding yourself play in delaying marriage?
I think it's number 1. I think divorce happens because we don't find ourselves. When you look at the second highest rate of divorce, it's women between 50 and 55. And I think that happens because you raise your children, you put in 100% of your work, and then the children leave and you look at your husband and you go, who are you? And he goes, who are you? So I think that there's this aspect that we sort of lose ourselves sometimes as women. But I do think there is a level of taking the time to figure out what do you like. I think that marriage doesn't happen at 21 anymore because that causes so much conflict. You spend the first 10 years of your marriage trying to figure out who you are. So I think that the strength of spending more time to figure out who you are, when you know that person, it's going to feel different and you know you're moving in the right direction. But, you know, as someone who I'm currently getting certified in meditation and mindfulness. So what I would say to that is you have to know your vision for life, for your partner, for your lover, for your family, for your children. And that takes time. Does not happen overnight. And marriage is a very serious decision. And you're talking about a legal and something that will definitely is about creating a partnership. So I think you have to find yourself. And even if you do get together and you get married and you don't know 100% of who you are, at least you're closer than you were than if you got married at like 21.
But do we ever really know who we are? I mean,
Yes.
I feel like that's like the problem.
We do.
I think people are constantly questioning, you know, is this the career that I want to be in? Is this the person that I am? Like, do I actually like yoga? You know, I think, right? I struggle with that one all the time. I mean, who you are at 20 is not who you are at 30. Who you are at 30 is not who you are at 40. And there are big life things and like hard challenges, big rocks in the road happen that actually change who you are. You know, you lose a loved one, you lose big finances, and those can really change who you are. And so I think it's constantly having to like kind of connect with a partner over and over again, not only find yourself, but find your partner and choose to be with them through that next big life change.
Can I comment to that? I think that the evolution of thought, meaning that when you start to know who you are, that will change over time, but it really is about the vision for your life. And I think that people are spending more time trying to understand what that is, so that when they do get with someone, even if those life changes happen, you still have that vision.
Like core values,
Yes.
core beliefs, core vision. Okay,
Yes.
I agree with you on that one.
Okay, let's talk about, is there a difference regionally between millennials across the country?
Yes.
So, okay, this is gonna be good. Can I start actually with Meredith? talking about regional differences with how you use the league or how you launch it in different parts of the country.
Yeah, absolutely. So the league is about to be live in 36 cities. So we've seen a lot of differences between, singles in San Francisco versus singles in Kansas City versus New York, et cetera. But the reality is, all the millennials that I've spoken to say that dating is really hard in their city. And every city I go to, they're like, oh no, but dating in Kansas City is the worst, and dating in Seattle is the worst. So I think that there is this commonality of the struggle of dating and almost that mindset and negativity. And I think I'd really love for us to kind of switch that and make it more of a positive. But in terms of dating, a lot of it stems from the political beliefs in certain cities, religious beliefs. For example, we're launching Salt Lake in 2 weeks, and that's a very different community of people. Religion definitely plays a big part of that. In New York, for example, the ratio of men to women is a lot different. I have a dating app profile. I have the league, Meredith League in San Francisco and Meredith League in New York, same exact photos. My league dating app in New York performs a lot lower than my San Francisco, and that's simply because the ratio, it's more competitive for women out there. There's just more women to men versus in San Francisco. So dating is definitely different depending on, city by city.
Laura, what were you gonna say? It's hard.
I'm from Texas, and I arrived in Kansas City, and I'll just give you that cultural aspect. Texas, it's its own country. I'll agree with all of you there, but it does have a flavor of that Southern gentleman. Guys open the door for you there, and they don't. They dance with you there. They don't just want to watch you dance. They dance with you. And so those are those things where when I got here, I was so wait, you're not going to dance? You just want to watch me dance? That's not how dancing works. And, oh, you're not going to, okay, I'll open the door for you. I'm such a gentle woman. I get it. So and I have the privilege to get to travel, and I've done the remote dating of just because I'm a curious bee, what is dating in New York like, and what is dating in Florida like, and just the caliber of dates across the nation. Wow, some people can take some lessons, and some people, I'm just gonna say, Lord bless them. So from a personal experience, it's astonishing how we have so many similarities, but we speak a different language, and we have various just social normities and expectations depending on where we grew up.
How are millennials disrupting cultural norms for Latinos?
Ooh. It's my passion topic, but I think that, religion, not so much a factor. I think with Latinos, you see a slight, it's still there, it's still present. Not with this one, but there are a lot of my friends who got married early and who still go to church, and religion is still a very big factor in how they carry out their life, and we're all millennials and we all have these conversations. And some of them chose to vote a specific way just because of their religion background. So I think that when you talk about Latinos, you're talking about acculturation and you're talking about language, and those are major factors that if you don't live in that world every day, you may be dating a person who never gets to experience the privilege of that, and you're having conversations and you're already not talking on the same playing field. You're at two different places in the world.
Any other perspectives? Here's a question. We were talking about this a little bit before the panel started tonight. What factors matter most when you're choosing a partner? So we talked a little bit about religion, and what about politics? Do millennials date people of different political affiliation from themselves?
It's tough.
Yeah, so we actually did a study and we surveyed over 20,000 of our users, and this was pre-election and post-election, and we were interested in, of these three things, education, profession, and political belief, what do you value most? Pre-election, it was education, profession, and politics. Post-election, it was education, politics, profession. So I definitely think that we're seeing some change in that regard.
Do we have more audience questions?
Yes. Yeah, to follow up on an earlier question, the audience wants to know, is race still an issue for millennials when it comes to marriage?
Yes. I think not necessarily what race you are, but what's your understanding of race? If you don't understand what white privilege is, if you don't understand how much privilege you have, and why, what's our country's history in all of this, it's gonna be tough. For me. Now, if you're on the same, level of understanding, it might be it's a moot point at that point. But not necessarily what background you come from, but how open are you to learn if you're not there already, and what is your level of understanding and appreciation to these things that are directly affected by race.
I think that's such a great way to put it. I think when we look at previous generations, millennials are definitely more open to different races, not only in terms of marriage, but friendship, but there does have to be that kind of understanding.
And Tinder actually just came out with a study showing that there are more interracial relationships than ever before because of dating apps. And I think that goes back to you are able to see people outside of the normal social circles in which you typically kind of interact with. And I think that's really an awesome kind of fact and for the future.
How about another question?
Right. We often assume any movement away from, quote, traditional is progress. But what do we have to learn from previous generations? Maybe in what ways have we not only made progress, but have we digressed?
In the context of marriage or in general?
Take it however you like.
Well, I think one thing we haven't really talked about yet, and maybe we'll hit this in the summary, is whether this is an issue. Is it a problem? Is it a crisis that millennials aren't marrying at the same rate that they were before? And from my perspective, no, we are not in a crisis issue right now. This is a societal norm that is changing. We have evidence on why it's changing. We have guesses on why it's changing. But it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing than what we've seen in previous generations.
Okay. Do we have another one?
All right. Are we seeing an increase in non-monogamous relationships in millennials? And if so, how does that affect marriage?
Well, we definitely are seeing this quote unquote hookup culture. But I think that the way that that's happening is just, it's through, meeting many different people. And the reality is that most millennials actually want partnerships and committed relationships. They just don't want it until they're 30 or older.
I would say that I agree with that. I think that, when most kids went to summer camps, I went to nursing homes. So I hung out with 80 and 90-year-olds who had been married for 30 to 40 plus years. And the best advice a 9-year-old ever told me, who was married for 50 years, was, Klassie, kiss every frog you can. Because then you'll know what you like and what you don't. And so I think what I encourage people to do is kiss as many frogs as you can. And then you'll know what makes sense for you. But I think that this fluidness of what is a relationship, commitment, I think that it's a beautiful thing to explore.
Marissa, can I ask you a question? You just talked about how we're not in a crisis. Do you think that people who are living together will continue to live together, or do you think they're just postponing marriage and eventually they'll get married?
Yes to both. I think part of it is that finding yourself and taking that extra time to not be married. I think some of them will decide to get married, but regardless of whether they get married or not, I don't think on the greater scale it matters in terms of what is happening in our society and whether this is a good thing or a bad thing.
You don't think it matters. So can I ask you guys all a question? Is marriage ever a contentious topic?
Yes.
With older people or younger people? So our whole point is to have civil conversations with non-like-minded people. In what circumstances does it become a confrontational topic?
I moved here and I was single for 7 years. Every year for Thanksgiving, I had that one tia, which is aunt, who was like, well, what's the matter? You're so cute, and you're so smart, and you got this good job. Like, what's your problem? And I'm like, no, I mean, I'm glad you and my uncle are still together, but are you happy? And then I got in trouble for asking that question. But I mean, I think when you go to like traditionalists in your network or within your family unit, that goes back and forth. And I've matured, so I used to have a contentious conversation, but I've grown up and matured, and now I get to eloquently tell my tia why I'm not married and validate my points with the data, and that's lovely. But I do think that can be a very contentious conversation when it's a family expectation.
Interesting. Any other thoughts?
And I also think that there are different, we're seeing that, there are some cities where the average age of marriage is a lot lower than certain cities that are higher. And so I think that, when you have friends or family in different cities, that's where, some of the issues around the conversation of marriage may arise. When you're 28, you've been in this relationship for 5 years and you're still not quite ready, and your friend in a different city is saying, well, I don't understand, everyone around me that age is married. So I think, it just takes some time for all the cities to kind of catch up with one another.
Do we have another question?
We do. How did the Great Recession affect millennials? And with the Great Recession behind us, will millennials begin looking like previous generations?
That's a great question. It affected them really greatly. When millennials were young and in their formative years and starting to go to college, they didn't have these opportunities. They knew they were supposed to go to college, that everybody has to go to college these days to get a good job, but they would finish in debt. They would finish being underemployed or unemployed or working somewhere that wasn't where they wanted to work. And I think in a lot of ways that kind of set their expectations for, I'm not going to finish school and then be independent and get married and start this life. We see a lot of the boomerang millennials who are moving back in with their folks because they can't pay off their student loans or they don't have that job they're looking for. So I do think in a lot of ways the recession is an active part of millennials delaying these next phases or these milestones in life.
Absolutely. And just to, again, piggyback off of that, we saw as a millennial through that recession, we saw our parents have a lot and then lose a lot. And so we think about that in our careers. And to your point, waiting longer so that we feel like we have this stable, almost like nest egg, to be able to then add it to a relationship.
Back to being established before you get married.
Fascinating. What about you, Klassie? What were you doing into 2008, 2009?
I was still in school, yeah.
Were people nervous about the recession and they were getting ready to graduate, like your peers?
I think people were, in the sense of just trying to find a job. I think people were concerned about the stability after I graduate. Will I get a job, secure a job? But I also think about, the lens, working with a lot of kiddos who have been abused and neglected, and thinking about how, the recession did cause a lot of emotions to come out, and it also, caused a lot of people to sort of lose themselves in a way, and I think that impacted a lot of kiddos, which I would be a part of that. So I don't know. I think, you know, being in a single parent household, my mom has always been an RN, so I grew up with an educated mother, and healthcare always needs people. So I never really saw that instability, but I know that my friends did, and maybe that makes them more gun shy to get married.
That makes sense. Okay. Everybody write down your questions, turn them in, hold them up. Let's see here. What have we not covered that everybody came prepared to discuss? Let's see here. How are different cultural norms affecting millennials' decision to get married? Do you feel like the cultural norms have changed?
I'm gonna go with culture as like, obviously I'm Latina in case you guys didn't catch it already. But let's talk about Kansas City Metro. Latinos are 10% of the Metro. Now, that means 10% of the Metro are my options. Well, wait, you gotta factor in women and male, and I like male, so that's maybe 50%. And then you have to factor in education, because you know I'm educated, so I want an educated guy. And then you gotta factor in, you know, what are his core values and religious beliefs and political stances. And then your list comes down to like maybe 6 people, and then you're like, but those are my friends, I can't do that. And so then you're like, well, okay, I got a strategy. I'm gonna see who comes into these like big new buildings in downtown, and how do I meet them? Crap, maybe I gotta go work at one, all right? And like, even through all of that, from a cultural perspective, like the struggle is real. And you know, I didn't have access to the league, so maybe I would have been more successful. But from just that, and that's just like one factor of culture. We haven't even talked about music. We haven't even talked about, you know, what is your view on culture, and how do you view the world, and you know, what is absolutely off limits from a cultural perspective. So I think it's a big factor, and I love this algorithmic approach because it gives you more access to like the pool. But just because there's a pool doesn't mean that everyone in that pool is being able to be fished. So it's hard.
I mean, I think that dating apps have really changed this cultural norm. Pretty much every single millennial has tried a dating app or knows a friend that has tried a dating app. I mean, how many of you guys have tried a dating app or know someone who is currently on dating apps? Yeah, it's a lot of us. And so with that shift in technology, there's new cultural norms, like how many messages do you send before asking that person to take things offline and meet on the first date? And we actually found that the average is about 34 messages. So this is a new cultural norm,
wow.
Right? This is a new cultural norm that we're seeing, that people actually want to have a little bit more conversation before taking things offline. A new cultural, like, terms are coming up, like ghosting and zombieing and breadcrumbing, all these terms which are very, very new. Is everyone like, what? I have no idea what that term is. But, you know, this idea is that we had no idea how to describe the act of messaging someone and them just not messaging us back. It's a weird feeling. And so we had to define it with this term ghosting. So I think there's going to be a lot more terms, you know, a lot more like changes in how we date and how we get to the first date, to kind of go to the, you know, changing cultural norms.
We are ready for a question.
We have a question from the audience. Outside of a marriage, just focused on relationships in general, how do millennials ensure solid, meaningful, personal, and professional relationships? So where do they go to meet people?
That's interesting.
So we actually found that there was a really big need for millennials, especially single millennials, to connect with others in the cities that they were in. So we actually built a feature called Groups and Events, which, you know, more than just the one-to-one dating that you kind of typically assume when you think about dating apps. We have groups in the app like people who like hiking, people who like to go out for wine, readers, gamers, co-ed sports groups, so that those who, you know, are both all value education and profession and are single can all meet up for these, you know, activities. And we also have events of the same nature. And I think that this is the generation that's going to kind of build a community and a social aspect around dating, which has never been the case before. Everyone before was like, you know, not telling people that they were on dating apps, or, you know, kind of keeping it kind of secret. And this is the first time ever that we're seeing people really excited to be a part of a singles community.
And that's really in line with what we've seen with millennials as consumers, that there's a really important aspect of that social togetherness that's peer affirmation. If you think about the last time you wanted to buy something really silly like toothpaste and you found yourself on Amazon reading 20 reviews about different types of toothpaste, we're seeing that happen in the consumerism aspect and the shopper aspect of millennials, that they have so much access to information, they have so much reach, not only with their kind of tier 1 community, but well beyond that out into the world, that it highly influences the decisions they make and how they do things and what they value. So it makes a lot of sense that that would translate into their dating lives and their IRL social lives. That's in real life in millennial.
And we're also ambassadors because we have big social reach. For example, my friend just recently posted on her Instagram a photo of her and her boyfriend she met on Tinder, and the caption was, "Glad I swiped right." Now, never before would she have been as open, but she then, in that moment, was telling everyone, hey, I met on Tinder, and by the way, I'm a huge brand ambassador of this app. So I agree with your point.
I met my husband on MySpace. So we are innovators. Yes, thank you, dear. We are innovators here, so I just wanted to point that out.
I'll say I went the old school route. Well, the old school route. I joined 6 boards when I first got here because I needed friends, and then I knew that friends could introduce me to friends. It didn't help in the whole dating aspect, but that's where my mind was, and that's where the strategy was. It actually did help. Now that I think about it. Okay, so it helped in my whole dating aspect, but it was a non-conventional way because the apps were still like, well, I don't know, you know, how safe is a person and all these questions that apps bring about. But I think serving on board and board servitude, you have more organizations like United Way that have that millennial opportunity for events and group engagements, and people go hoping that they're gonna, you know, we both support the community, so, you know, it's probably gonna work out.
Yeah, I would like to add, you know, I do a lot of presentations on networking and networking for the introvert, which is always a lot of fun. But in that, I do talk a lot about this aspect of meeting people, and I think that there's something there because you never know who you're going to meet. So I rarely go to probably 3 to 4 networking events a week because I believe that connection is super important. And I think that all of the aspects and events we have on Facebook and all these other platforms are crucial for us. And I think that's where you have more dating that's different from generations before. And I think that that's a great thing to have because you never know who you're going to meet. You could be meeting your next ex-husband or husband or, you know, whoever. Right.
Okay, this might be, maybe I'll ask one question, then we'll do one more audience question. What is the millennial male looking for? Does he want to get married?
Hey, guys, I got some single friends. I was just wondering, what is it that, you know, I don't know that we know. I think that, you know, as these ladies are talking about their ambition and their careers and what they're looking for in a mate, I think that these days women have a lot of really great role models in that sense. And what's happening in the world, we won't go into politics, but there's a lot of really great things happening in women's movement right now. I don't know that men have that same role model to follow. So while we were kind of, you know, dogging on the men earlier, I don't think it's necessarily your fault that you don't know what women want because you've just listened to 4 women talk about different things that they want. I don't think that we know what those trends are with men yet. I don't know that people are paying enough attention, and I don't know that it's an organized movement, but I hope to see more men coming to events like this and listening to women and hearing them and acknowledging what they have to say and learning from that.
I mean, I think that we're seeing on the league that men are looking for the person who will help like fill their power couple. They want a woman who's educated, who has profession, who is coming into this as an individual. You know, we did a study where we kind of looked at the top performing females and specifically on photos. And what we saw was, of course, number one is hair. Guys really were interested in women with like luxurious hair. And women who wear white, which of course goes back to that like antiquated norm of that white wedding dress and virginity, which is a little bit disheartening. But what we did see, which was amazing, is that men who were highly educated were 10 times more likely to match with a woman who was also highly educated. And same goes for profession. So I think that men are just looking for a partner who can keep up with speed.
Any Kansas City insight on what men want here locally?
Man, that's a puzzle. I just, I'm blessed with very candid friends, and I think that in Kansas City, we're looking for the same thing, but it's that numbers game, right? And I think that my personal findings were that in the Midwest, people get married really early, whereas where I come from, people take some time. And here in the Midwest, when you sit at the bar and you spark up a conversation, odds are that that guy's gonna be married already and he wants to introduce you to his wife because you're so awesome. And so that was new, but fascinating to me because it's, it's like, oh, you're just like my wife, you need to meet her. And I'm like, wait, why are you talking to me? Like, this is not, so that's all I got.
Bravo.
Yeah. Well, I think what I'm seeing is that, I think women have a checklist. I do get a little bit concerned with my friends who are over 35 and want to have kids, and they're under this time crunch, this clock, this biological clock. And you ask them, like, well, where is your ideal man? And they give you a list of 100 things. And I'm like, who is this? Like, when you find him, tell me who he is, if he has a brother, because I'd love to meet him. But I think that I'm seeing a lot of my male friends, they're having lists too. And I'm just like, wow, are we ever going to meet who we're supposed to be with if we think like they're 5'6" and they have a master's degree and we have all these checklists? And I'm thinking, like, we're missing the point. Like, the point is not a checklist. The point is, do you see this person and do you love them unconditionally? And I think that some of the app use and when you can click and check and all that kind of stuff, it can sort of confuse and warp your mentality. But yeah, I'm seeing more men that are coming with a really long checklist.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, time for one more question.
All right, our last question. How have we seen these changes affect how and in what context children are raised? What have the outcomes been for children?
Interesting.
I think that's a great question. I don't know that I have evidence or research behind that in particular, but I think we're certainly seeing a spike in children who are raised, who are co-parented by people who maybe never were married, and in a lot of cases, that's a choice. I have a dear friend who is 30 and has been with his girlfriend for 2 years, and they hadn't really talked about marriage, but they decided they wanted to start a family and had a baby, and then they did get engaged, and I think they actually got married like 3 days before she was due. So there might have been some parental pressure in there. But they're not necessarily thinking in terms, you don't really have to be married to have kids. And I suppose you never did, but I don't know that anybody was really questioning that. So I do think that we're seeing more of that. I don't know how it's going to impact kids in the long run, but I think it'll be really interesting to see.
We don't have many league babies, although we do know of 5 of them, so it's a little too soon to tell what's going to happen. But we have noticed that As opposed to older generations, they got married and then had a few years married without children. And now we're seeing people, millennials, getting married and then stopping birth control right away for the children. Right. So I think that that's a big difference that we're going to be seeing for future generations is marriage and then directly after children, simply because our biological clocks still haven't gotten the memo that we're living longer and working longer.
That's great. One more, yep.
We have one more question. So in what ways is dating harder for millennials than previous generations? If everyone in every city says dating in my city is the worst, is there any truth to any of that? And they wanted to point out this is from a millennial asking this question. So.
Yeah, I think that, again, back to what I said before, this is the first generation with, we're to come into technology and there's no rules or regulations on how to act or perform. We are literally making it up and defining it as we go, and I think that's the challenge. And we've also been given these 10 plus years to date, and to date not to find someone, but to date to find multiple different relationships. And I think that is the challenge. It's easy to find love. It's easy, I think, to find someone that you could fall in love with, but really hard to find that compatibility piece. I think that's what millennials are having the challenge with, is finding someone who shares the same values, the same beliefs, the same career perspective. And I think that's where people are kind of struggling with it.
And I would add to that, Meredith, I mentioned at the beginning one of the differences is that millennials have all this information, which can be great and make their world huge, but it can also be overwhelming. And millennials are dating in this day and age when they have all this information about people before they meet them in person. And it allows them to select or deselect people based on that 100 checklist that they have, as opposed to finding that chemistry or even being more open-minded to meet people in person and suss it out that way.
Okay. We always conclude our American Public Square events by asking, so what, now what? So we'll just go down the line and we'll start with the so what, right? Marriage and millennials, so what? And you can simplify your statement for the entire evening. So summarize your point of view in a single short statement. You want to start down on this end?
So millennials are getting married at a slower rate, and my so what is so what?
Hear, hear. Well said.
So what's the first one? So
what? So summarize your point of view in a single statement.
Okay, so what? Millennials have this amazing, unique opportunity to be the first generation to have that social community, to have more options for compatibility. And I suggest to really invest in your dating, invest in all different ways.
Okay, Laura? So what?
So we get more options than our future or past generations, and so what?
I would say, so what? Waiting pays off.
Perfectly said. Okay, so now we'll do the now what. So this is the point where you can give a recommendation, a call of action to the audience members to go out and do as a result of being here tonight and participating in this conversation. So as far as marriage and millennials go, now what?
So to all of the parents of millennials out there, arranged marriage is not going to come back. I know you came here hoping we were going to solve this crisis and get your kids married and those grandkids in your hands. But on a personal level, it's lay off of your millennial children. Their world is very, very different than it was for you and for your parents, and give them the time and the space to live their lives the way they're going to. Millennials, you be you. I think that where the rest of the world needs to catch up here when we look at the government and we look at industries, they do need to look at this trend that it is possible that millennials will not get married at the same rate as previous generations, and that will affect real estate. That will affect the automobile industry. It'll affect the wedding industry. So I think it's important for the world around us to watch these trends and try and get a step ahead of how can we serve these millennials if when they are boomers age, they are living alone or they are doing the Golden Girls thing, which is my dream. So I think that it's not for us to push the millennials into something that is not what they want to do, but for the rest of the world to catch up.
Our millennials go on an average of 2 dates per month, and I think that that is a great number, and that helps with that dating fatigue and people being exhausted and frustrating with dating. But if you go on 2 dates a month, that gives you an amazing opportunity to meet a ton of different kinds of people and not kind of get exhausted by the process.
I love the diversity in this room from all aspects. So now what? I would challenge you to look at the world in what millennials live in today and don't define love for them. If they want to marry a person that you don't agree with and you would never marry, you ain't marrying them. They are. So let them. And that's a contract that they get to figure out. And so I challenge you guys, if you agree with me, awesome. If you don't, I challenge you to look at it from a new perspective. And if you do agree with me and you get there eventually, have those conversations, because this is one conversation that you can extend with your network, and we can start to open minds in this country, and we're just going to be better for it.
I wrote this down. So I said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. So what I would say is leave no stone unturned. Speak to every single person that you see, put a smile on your face, and have an open heart, and love will come.
Okay, thank you so much. You four have been incredible. We're so grateful for your time. I'll turn it back to Ambassador Katz.
First of all, can you all hear me on this? Okay, good, okay. I want to thank the panel. I would like to, just a short personal observation, being a boomer as opposed to a millennial. I remember when I was young with my father, the idea really was that he had no unexpressed thought, which wasn't necessarily appreciated by his children. So my wife and I have made a real concerted effort to sort of basically not share every thought with our millennial children, because we have found that they don't really appreciate it very much. So my admonition to the millennials sitting up here is you should remember this if and when you have your own children, how much you would have appreciated the advice that you would receive from your parents at this point in life. At any rate, it's one of the few prerogatives I have. At any rate, so I want to thank all the panelists for being here. I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our roving reporters, our fact checker, and we're going to present with each of our panelists with an engraved civility bell. Now, for those of you that if this is your first event or you haven't recall, we have now given out approximately 300 of these. The goal really is to have 1,000 civility bells given throughout this community, and we keep trying to move in that direction. As for you, what you do with this bell is you put it either at your home or your office, and when things get a little out of hand, you ring the bell, and then everyone has to be quiet, okay? Very good, okay, right, okay. I want to thank again tonight our sponsor, the Martha Jane Phillips Star Field of Interest Fund, and the Star family for their support. All the volunteers that you saw who helped you with all of these things from American Public Square, as well as the American Public Square staff, I want to thank you all, because it wouldn't happen without you. And shortly, everyone here is going to be receiving in your inbox a link to a short post-event survey. Please take a minute. It literally will take you a minute or less. Just take it. We value the feedback and rely on it to plan our programs and events in the future. Please think about joining us for the remaining events of the year. The event on segregation that's going to take place on the 19th of April ought to be a particularly compelling program. We have Tanner Colby, who is the award-winning author. We have Mayor Sly James, who's going to be there, and 2 other panelists. It's going to be at the Johnson County Community Library, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong here. Am I right? They're good. I got that right. And For those of you that saw yesterday's article in the Kansas City Star on Sly James and how he grew up in this city, I think that the program ought to be particularly compelling. I hope you all can be there. And we have our evening at the Square on the 2nd of May, which will be at the Carbank Building over on State Line, Shawnee Mission Parkway, and we hope that some of you will join us at that. Now, in closing, because I am going to close now. If you want more information, there's a lot in your playbill on these programs. And last but certainly not least, the bar will remain open until 8:30. Okay? Also on your way out, there are souvenir glasses for tonight. So please take one. And thank you all very much on behalf of American Public Square.
Thank you so much.